In our previous video, we discussed that the government intervention in the market can have impacts. Well, it can have lots of impacts, but we are focusing in on government intervention that actually has impacts on prices of the product, because that's what we're doing in this course is price theory. And so we broke it down into thinking of two forms of government intervention: direct government price controls, or taxes or subsidies, and their impact on prices. In this video, we're going to focus on direct government price controls. And essentially, those government price controls, we can think of those as price floors, or we can think of those as price ceilings. Price floors are exactly what it means, exactly what it sounds like. Price floors is a price the government announces that the price in the market can never go below that. A price ceiling is a price the government announces that which prices can never go above that. So price floors are quite common in certain markets, especially agricultural markets. The government announces that the price of X will never go below $3.50 a bushel or something like that. Price ceilings, these are in the news all the time, because price ceilings there's many of them, but the one that you probably are most familiar with is rent control. The government can make an announcement that rents in this city can never go above $600 a month or something like that. Okay, so we're going to talk about how these markets work, and we'll start with price floors. Okay, so price floors are situations where the government announces, the governing body, whatever that is, could be a state, could be the federal government, announces a minimum price. Price can go above it. Okay? You just can't go below it. So think about this product. Here's quantity. Here's price. Here's a demand curve. And this is, let's say, the floor price. The floor price means exactly what it says. If price up here is perfectly legal, this price is legal because it's greater than the floor price. But all of these prices are illegal because they're below the floor price. The government just won't let it happen. Okay? So price can never drop below that. Let's figure out how this market works. Okay? So we're going to draw a graph. And on our graph, we're going to be a little bit more accurate than that sloppy one I just put up. We're going to draw a vertical axis, and we're going to draw a horizontal axis. And we'll put price on the vertical axis, and we'll put quantity on the horizontal axis. And we're going to draw a demand curve. Looks something like that. And we're going to draw a supply curve. It looks something like that. And we'll label this as S0. And this one we'll call D0. And what happens here is we could call this part the P0, Q0 is what you would have seen back in the first module. That was the equilibrium in a free market. But the market's not free. The government has announced a floor price. Now, where is that floor price? Well, one thing you got to understand is the floor price, if the floor price was anywhere below this, if the floor price is anywhere below this, then the market price is above it, so the floor price is not binding. It's irrelevant. Okay, so for the floor price to be of anything interest, it's got to be above where the market would like to be. Okay, in other words, if I tell you there's a binding floor price, then you know that binding floor price has to be something like up here, P sub floor. Now, at that floor price, consumers only want to buy alpha, and firms want to sell beta. How does that work? You say, well, Larry, there is a surplus here. Remember that? We looked at that back when we did demand curve. This would, in a freely functioning market, what would happen? Well, that surplus would put downward pressure on price, and as price went down, people would want to buy more of the product, quantity demanded would increase, and firms would not put so much on the market, and eventually they would get rid of that surplus. But that's not allowed here because the floor price says you can never go below piece of floor. Now, what type of examples would this be? Well, as I mentioned last video, this is quite frequent in agricultural markets. If you were to go back, if you were to go back and look at agricultural markets in the United States, let's say in the 1960s, in agricultural prices, the government had floor prices for everything. Price of corn could never go below $3.50 a bushel. The price of beans could never go below $6.25 a bushel, ever. Okay, it could go above it, but it could never go below that. Okay, and the government enforced these in all sorts of different ways. Now, they do it in all of those grain price floors. All of those agricultural markets were basically abolished in the 70s, and free markets took over. And the Board of Trade kind of trades corn and soybeans and all of these active cotton and wheat and all that on active, freely flowing markets. One market, however, was still under a price floor up until basically January 2015, not too long ago, and that is fluid milk at the dairy barn level. The government didn't care about regulating price floors at your convenience store or your supermarket. They wanted the price to the actual producer of milk, that is the dairy farmer, could never get below a certain level. And there are all sorts of reasons why they did that that are not important to us to talk about right now, but they did impose that. And see, what happens in that situation is that consumers only want to buy a certain amount. We've already talked about that, okay? Firms want to put this amount on the market. What's going to happen here? Well, how do you make that market work? Well, the only way you can make that market work is that somebody's got to buy that milk. If there's nobody to buy the milk, just because you say, well, the price can't go below $5 a gallon for your milk, if you produce a lot of milk, you could say, well, who's going to buy this milk? And the government says, well, I don't know, but the price can't go above $5. Well, that's not going to work. Okay, because the farmers, all that stuff is going to spoil and be bad, and that's an out of equilibrium situation, and all sorts of black markets would arise and everything to try and get that the price to be lower than that. So the only way this can stay, the only way you can have this thing support itself, is to have something where the government actually buys it. And so what happened when you have a price floor is the government points out that, you know what? At that floor price, consumers only want to buy, we'll call this quantity demanded at the floor price, but firms produce this much actual milk, quantity supplied at the floor price. And what that means is that this difference, this surplus, has to be purchased by the government. The government buys that at that price. The government becomes a buyer and joins in side by side with these alpha consumers. You also add on top of that, besides the alpha consumers, you add on top of that the U.S. government coming in and buy that. And this gap is the amount purchased. How much did they pay for that? Well, they paid this floor price. Okay, remember, at this price, they're paying that amount for each unit. And so we know that the government, therefore, is paying this vertical distance. Okay, that's really the price it's paying per gallon of milk. How many gallons of milk does it buy? This horizontal distance. Well, you know, if you multiply base times height, you get the area of a rectangle. So in fact, this rectangle, the value of this rectangle would be the total outlay by the U.S. government, total expenditure buying surplus milk. The only way the government can make the milk floor,
the price floor work is the government has to absorb the extra production that comes as a result of not letting the price sink. These people are going to put a lot of stuff on the market, and the government's got to absorb that. Okay. What's the government do with it? Well, they can't. You may say, well, maybe they're going to sell it. No, they can't sell it, because if they turn around and try to sell it, once again, the only people they can sell it to are people who are on this curve, and they've already said, at this price, I only want to buy this amount. Okay? If you want me to buy more of that milk, you're going to have to lower the price, and if you lower the price, I'll buy some more. But that's not what the government's there. So what's the government do? Well, it turns out in this market, the government figured out a convenient use for this. They make it into government cheese. So they took that milk that they bought and produced cheese out of it. And then on any given weekend, in every town across America, you can hear these people making public service announcements that there'll be government cheese giveaway at the National Guard Armory on University Street all day Saturday and Sunday, or at local religious organizations, non-for-profits. They'll have at the ice rink this weekend there'll be a government cheese giveaway, and so the government produces all this, buys all this extra milk up, and it has to absorb it off the market. So they produce cheese, and that way they can hold up the price to support the price floor. By the way, that ended in January of 2015, and so the prices for dairy milk actually fluctuate according to market prices. It's been a difficult life, to say the least, for dairy farmers, because they were in a situation where many dairy farmers had gotten large under the idea that they're going to really end up selling, they're really going to sell this total amount, some of which went to consumers and the rest went to the government, but they still needed to gear up to be able to support that type of market. And that type of market's not there anymore. So it's been a difficult few years for dairy farmers as they're trying to rebalance the overall size of herds and production now that there's less. The government's no longer waiting in the market and being a huge purchaser of surplus milk to support those higher prices.